So I think we're talking about career pathways now, right? Well, it's kind of continuous with what we talked about just now.
Yes.
So if you were to look at the study, you'd see, as I said when I introduced it, that there's a tremendous amount of stress in being a chief information security officer. And I'm not going to reiterate what it says in the study. You can read it if you're interested. But I want to make a more positive statement about it. Some of the CISOs that I know are among the most influential people in their company. They have a tough job. If something goes wrong, they're very publicly called out. But at the same time, they are a partner in every new initiative. So I think it's a very exciting place to be, a very exciting field to be in. It's a very exciting time to be in this field. So with that, can we move on to our panel?
Yes, thank you. Welcome, Paul, welcome. So we're going to just kind of continue on the theme that we started with before. And if each of you could talk about how you became a CISO or how you ended up in the cybersecurity field. What was your career pathway to get to where you are now?
Sure. I'm Paul Cunningham. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for the Department of Energy. So I think 2006, I was a helicopter pilot in the Navy. So if you kind of think, in 12 years, how does somebody go from just flying a helicopter to being CISO? Hopefully I can kind of cover some of that uniqueness that made the difference. And really it goes into the years of experience that you get before you're kind of even considering this executive level type work. As an admin officer, I wrote policy in the Navy. At one point I was even an analysis officer, so I had to work with the legal guys to make sure that the chain of custody was being taken care of. All that stuff applies into it. But one of the major things was actually flying, where I had to do risk management, and I taught risk management for the Navy, crew resource management, how to communicate better in the cockpit, and then also do mishap investigations, which was obviously helpful. And we had our own mishap in cyber to be able to unwind and be able to get the factual, the critical information to the senior leaders when they needed it. So, fast forward again. So 2006, I get out of the Navy. I start working as a cybersecurity analyst because, fortunately, in the Navy they like to make you work. When you're not flying, you got to do something, right? So I spent a lot of time on cybersecurity or IT work, as well as IT director for a bit, and had about 3,000 users that I had to manage in that group. So along the way, I picked up my CISSP and ethical hacker, my certificates along the way, which is helpful. So when I made that transition out, I could actually do some cybersecurity analyst work. I got to tell you, the first job was not that great. It was just looking at certification and accreditation paperwork. And we were really slow at doing it. And I found a way to do it quicker using tools that were readily available to us, and take scan results and put them into Excel and dump them in Access and dump them back again to be able to get these reports quicker. And all of a sudden, hey, that initiative was recognized. And next thing you know, I was working, again, I was a contractor, so I started working as the division manager in my company, where I had to learn budgets. And I spent more time talking about budgets and contracts and all this stuff that had nothing to do with cybersecurity. But again, it became another tool in that toolbox for me to go out. And when the time came, and I said, hey, I want to be a CISO, I've talked to CISOs, I know I got that capability. I like to lead, I like to make those decisions. I came back in the federal service with the intent that I want to become a CISO. And so that's how I did it. So in 2010, I took another, not a CISO job, I took a branch director job, writing policy and exception to waivers, the most unexciting part about cybersecurity. But that got me in, right? That got me in where I could start talking to people, and I got to work with the SOCs a lot closer. And next thing you know, I'm running a SOC. Was part of it in my portfolio. And then someone left.
You want to explain to people what a SOC is, just in case not everybody knows what that
is? In the IT, you have your network operation centers that put the boxes on the desk, get them set up, make sure users can get in and accessing the places they need to go. The security operations center marries very closely to the network operations center, looking for those sort of anomalies or signatures that might indicate that there's a compromise going on and then help remediate when an attack occurs. So that's the Security Operational Center. One thing that was pointed out earlier was people kind of fleet up. People leave the federal space and they go into corporate, or they're in corporate and they go to another company. The trick is to kind of get into that networking, into that slipstream in a way that when the opportunity comes, you're going to have the skills, the resources. You've written papers, you've wrote opinions, you've argued points successfully and unsuccessfully is just as important too, and how well you handle that. So that way, when you're ready and you get that opportunity, you apply, you have something really concrete to differentiate yourself from the other candidate and be that right person for that right job. So that's pretty much how it happened for me. I went to Department of Energy from ICE. I was a branch officer. There was an opportunity for me to be a deputy CISO for Department of Energy. Within 8 months of getting there, the CISO got a great job on the outside. And guess who was acting, right? And that just starts, putting your slipstream. And then you're in there, right? Now you're acting, now you're applying for CISO jobs, or you're going on details to do exciting work, high-profile work. I was the executive director for healthcare.gov. By the way, in 2015, no one in their right mind was going to take that healthcare.gov job. But I get a phone call from an assistant secretary from another organization that said, hey, I want you to come over and help us. And it's kind of hard to say no at that. But now I got a little card in my pocket, right? That if I need some help, I know I can call a couple people. And that network is really important. You get a reputation out there, you get your name out there, that critical thinking, that willing to go out there on the limb a little bit and saying, hey, we're doing it this way, but we can do maybe a little bit smarter, a little bit cheaper, a little bit better, preferably combination thereof. And then you'll make a name for yourself and doors will magically open for you. So probably a little long-winded. I used up all of his time. So,
Can I just ask one question?
Oh, absolutely.
I don't know if anybody else would like to know this, but is it more exciting being a CISO or a helicopter pilot?
They both have their challenges. One of the jobs in the Navy, I was a flight instructor, and I said that's hours of boredom being broken up by moments of sheer terror as the students trying to kill you. But I think that's the way cybersecurity is, right? I mean, the best you can do is break even. You make sure nothing bad happens, and then when something bad happens, everybody is ringing your phone and knocking on your door. And you got to be there. You got to be there with an idea, a thought, a strategy to kind of move forward in a very logical way, because that's what you're paid to go do.
Thank you. Dr. Nobles.
Well, my career is a little different. I consider myself to be a cybersecurity researcher. I actually work for a Fortune 50 company as the lead for identity and access management, more so along the lines of privileged access management. So I'm one of the team members that actually come in and say, no, you can't have access to something, but it's really based on risk. We just don't say no just to say no. So, but my career started about a large agency about 15 miles south of here. You can't miss it if you don't take the BWI Parkway. There's some large buildings over there with a lot of security around it. Stay out of there. But that's when my career started, in the basement over there. It was started before it was called cyber. Back then, we used to call it computer network operations, Joe, computer network attack, computer network defense. So I grew up in those days, and as a Navy cryptologic officer, I spent a lot of time doing cryptologic work, different type of cryptologic elements for the different agencies up in the DC area, working with different agencies like this. And so I grew up in that element. So this was it was very normal for me to make that natural transition. Typically, as a cryptologic officer, you either stay with the signals intelligence side or you either go with the cyber side. So I went with the cyber side, and that's where I really found where I really resonated, where I really enjoyed it. And today, I consider myself to be a cybersecurity researcher. I happen to be a cybersecurity policy fellow for a think tank down in DC. So I spent a lot of time developing relationships. This morning I was on the phone with a CIO and a CISO for about 45 minutes, actually on my drive up here, because they ran into a problem and they called me and asked me for some assistance because they know that I do a lot of research on the side. So you don't necessarily have to go out and sit in the hot seat, because this is a hot seat. And I'll tell you that right now, that's one of the things that I'm contemplating. Is it worth the move to be in here, or can I work the angle that I'm working now as a cybersecurity professional and as a researcher and be just as successful? And so some people take different routes. I would tell you right now, if I go in and ask my CISO, do I want to, about being a CISO, he would tell me to run the other direction, because it's a challenging job. I mean, it's a huge transition going from being a technical SME to being a business executive, because that's one of the things that we need to understand. As a CISO, you're not a technical executive. You're a business executive. Your job is to address risk, change management, profit, or national security issues, depending on what's the nature of your business. You just happen to be very technical because you spent a lot of time. It takes 15 to 20 years to make a CISO. That's a long time in the making. And if you don't have that underpinning, to be very knowledgeable on the systems and the background of information security and cybersecurity, it shows. We've seen it in several high-profile cases. I don't want to name them, but we've seen where the CISO was not really qualified to be there. We need to take these jobs very, very seriously. And so for your large organizations, we have there's one CISO, but what we call business line information system officer. These are men and women who serve in smaller capacities as like a CISO. They have the same level of responsibility, but they report up to the chief information security officer. And these are great learning platforms and positions to be in, so you can actually learn the role. A lot of people serve in these roles and they run in the opposite direction because they see it's extremely challenging. So my takeaway for this is that, you can be, there's so many jobs in this community. CISO just happens to be one. CIO just happens to be another. CSO is another one. Chief Technological Officer is another one. There's so many jobs in this field. If just work towards them. But I tell you, learn the foundations. Learn the foundations of just being an information security officer, and just learn the foundation of being cybersecurity, and you will find yourself, you will promote to different positions. There's so many positions out there, we can't even name them all. So.
Thank you. The next question. Earlier, someone mentioned the target breach. I view the target breach as the one that really woke up the country and the world. Mm-hmm. CEOs started to pay attention. Government officials started to really pay attention beyond lip service. How do you maintain a job as a CISO when you look at the potential risk within the environment for an attack, for some kind of incident or some kind of vulnerability to really have an impact on your business environment? How do you manage that as a CISO?
Well, I think the first thing is trust. A CISO, again, spends a lot of their time with the other chief executives and with the other, even with the board of directors, spend a lot of time doing that type of work. So they have to entrust the team to do their responsibility. I tell you, we talk about the target breach. I don't think the target breach is the most egregious breach. I think the most egregious breach is the Yahoo breach, because that's when the leadership there absolutely failed. They knew about it, they didn't do anything about it. And so working with my CISO, I can tell you that he spends a lot of times in meetings. So a lot of times I'm looking at his calendar, trying to find a way to get in with him, and I can't. I might go 2 weeks before I'm able to get in with him. So I'm entrusted to make those decisions. I make those decisions based on my training. I make those decisions based on the risk management profile for the organization, and I make those decisions based on the threat. So I take all those things in, and we make decisions. I'll give you a story here. I just started working with this company that I worked for the day was a year ago that I started with this company. Everybody was on leave during Christmas, except for me. I'm the new guy, right? We needed a policy signed. Guess who signed that policy? I signed that policy on December the 18th. My boss came in on January the 15th, and he said, "Who signed that policy?" I said, "I did." And you know what? He looked at me and he said, "You know what? Congratulations. That's exactly what I wanted you to do." I had to get that policy pushed through because we were holding up other projects. And that's him entrusted me. Even though I was a new guy, I was able to take all of it in and just look at the situation from a risk management aspect and make a decision. And that's exactly what I did. I based the policy on risk management. And so that's what it's really about. It's really about how well you're approaching the problem and how well you are able to stay on course and how well you're able to represent that, because the board of directors, the CEO, everybody, they know how much money that they're investing in cybersecurity. It's our responsibility to use that money wisely. Over the course of time, you need to show that your program, your cybersecurity program, is actually maturing. If you can't show that your program is maturing, that's when the seat gets even hotter. And so they can't keep investing millions and millions of dollars every year into a cybersecurity program where there's no return on an investment or no return on risk mitigation. we have to be able to show that. And so that's how we take a lot of pressure, not only off our CISO, but off our CEO and everybody else, is that we show the difference. We're able to show the board of directors what we're doing. We're able to show how we're mitigating the risk, and we're able to present back to them the metrics that show that our cybersecurity programs are strengthening. But again, it's a never-ending fight. There's always something going on. Well, you might be totally compliant today. Tomorrow, you might not be compliant. But that's okay. You roll up your sleeves and you start mitigating the reason why you're not compliant today. And that's how you win in cybersecurity.
Paul?
I always joke around about I'm only 35, so I'm either a CISO or a crack addict. I don't know. So I'm kinda, you know, it's a hard job. It's a hard job being a CISO. You have to trust yourself. You have to trust your team. Mm-hmm. You have to trust your leadership, as you mentioned, and that's where it really gets into, are you really doing compliance? Are you really just checking boxes and running down things that are not in compliance just to go back and run the whole trap again? But for me, I found it very successful to really base everything into the risk management and risk principles. That sometimes means training people that think they're very good at risk management into using sound risk management principles. And when they are above your pay grade, that's even more tricky. So yeah, kind of know your audience and how to work with them a little bit. For me, I look at it this way. I got my boss is the chief information officer who reports to the secretary. And so, you know, everybody knows Secretary Perry, or most will do. So, you know, when you start thinking about it that way, what I write down and give to my boss may be in the paper or may be in talking points. And they have to be what I call completed staff work. They have to be really thought out, not a voluminous thought piece, but sometimes it just might be bullet points that the deputy secretary has to read in 5 minutes to go in front of a camera and speak about as if they're very well versed. And they're very intelligent people, but you got to know what to say and how to say it and understand that environment. And so it's really kind of that trust that you talked about. And really it's about showing due diligence, because you're never gonna, if you can show that you're doing due diligence, I mean, yes, people are gonna be mad that there's a breach and data was lost. Actually, I really liked the Target breach, because right before that, and a lot of people don't know that because I was around 13, Department of Energy had a major breach, and it was 104,000, it wasn't millions. So the fact that it was so many people, we kind of fell back underneath the radar a little bit. But I got to tell you, we spent a good 7 months every day, Saturday, Sunday, holidays, on phone calls, 8:30 tag-up calls. What are we doing today to find every one of those 104 people to make sure that they were alerted, they were notified, and remediation actions were being put in place, on top of trying to patch the holes and get into a stronger structure. So, you know, the CISO is great, but it's a lot of work. It's a lot of, you know, working your teams, and you got your teams that are in there, and then something bad happens, and they got to believe in you in a way that they're going to come and bring their A game for 7 months straight, being able to call. And, you know, granted, they were taking days off and we were running shift teamwork, but man, that is hard, you know. And by the way, you're not going to win this. You already lost the data, right? And you're just trying to put the lid back on. You're just trying to get the frogs back in the boiling pot. And, you know, that's the tough part. So again, I go back and if you're doing that, if you're working with your teams, working with your leadership, and when the breach happens, they have the confidence when you tell them that, you know, we're doing everything possible, and they believe you, you're probably going to work your way through it. If they have no confidence in you when you have a breach, you need to probably start polishing up the resume, you know, because you're not going to be there very long.
Thank you both. Excellent answers. Next question. Is a CISO the pinnacle of the career, or is there something after being a CISO? What's next for a CISO?
You know, I think I look at it, I think from a cybersecurity perspective, it's pretty much getting there. I mean, you can move to other organizations. You know, Department of Energy, we call ourselves the 14th largest cabinet level, so I can move up the pecking order, or, you know, try to work another federal job, or I can move into the commercial world and work into the, the Fortune 500, Fortune 100s, and kind of work my way up. And then I think most CISOs I talk to kind of get to a point where they're either advising, consulting, because they've been there, they've been in the fire, they've seen those tough moments, and they want to give back to the community and those people. At the first time, it's interesting, I think I mentioned that the CISO left, and I was a deputy CISO, I became the acting CISO. 6 days later, we had that breach I just talked about. So you talk about trial by fire. And if it wasn't for someone that was kind of helping set the pace and making sure that we were on track and having that team available, it probably wouldn't have gone as well. I mean, as well as can be expected when you lose something like that. And that's how we measured our success, is how do we do that. So I think for someone that wants to be a CISO, I mean, it's usually, as you mentioned, you got a 15-year on-ramp, you got some timing issues, you kind of got to need to be in place, you got to go out and experiment a little bit, get some branding out there, and then when it hits, and then you kind of hold on, you ride, looking for those little nuances, little nuggets, because there's no roadmap. And then you'll find that right thing that's for you that will go. I know some CISOs that when they hung their hat up, that was it. They don't do anything with cyber. I don't even think they have a computer anymore. They're just so scared about cybersecurity. They're like, I can finally sleep. I'm not going to have a computer in the house. But I think there's more. There's a lot more to it out there. I think it's kind of, you get in that level and you can start seeing the next hill, and you'll know it's the right hill for you to go to.
Now, before we go to the audience, I want to ask one more question to Dr. Nobles. What role does education play in becoming, or the pathway to becoming, a CISO? And while you're actually a CISO, what's the importance role of education?
I'll say education is very key. I know what, especially at the doctoral level, what they do, it gives you the ability to go out and research things and bring those things back to the organization. I don't know how many times throughout the week I go out and research something, and I bring it back. And because I'm able to do that, my team actually expects that of me, of doing that now. One of the things that I really like to research that we really have been incorporating into our organization is human factors. There's not a whole lot of people that really understand human factors in cybersecurity. You know, I tell people all the time, we invest millions of dollars in security and awareness training, but we don't really take a look at, really what's going on cognitively and psychologically with the end users, or even with the people that's running our cybersecurity operations. And one of the things I like to do to the CISO, I like to ask them, how complex are your security operations? Can you quantify how complex your security operations are?
Very complex.
Right.
Is that quantifiable enough for you?
But if I ask you, but if I ask him as a helo pilot, what are your critical phases of flight?
Oh yeah, I can break those down in 3 or 4.
You see what I'm saying here? We haven't done due diligence in understanding that and breaking that down and leveraging those things from other technical fields. And so that's one of the things that I like doing, is going out, borrowing things from other technical fields and bringing them back to cybersecurity and making use of those things in our organization. So it plays a huge role. You don't really actually necessarily need a doctorate degree. I know people that don't have any degree who are very savvy at going out researching and bringing things back. You just have to have that passion, the affinity for wanting to find out what's next and what's right. And that's exactly what we need. To be honest with you, I've hired people who don't have any education, but you know what they had? They had heart and the affinity for it. We would educate you later. A lot of companies would do that. They would send you to school to get the undergraduate degree, to get the graduate degree, to get the certificates. But what we can't find on a daily basis are those that have the heart and the passion to do the work. Because the type of work that we're doing, and so most of you sitting out there know, it's not like the work we see on TV where you got all the code moving real fast, you got everything that's looking real glamorous. It's not that. It's total 180 of that. And so having someone who wants to be educated, who wants to be a continuous learner, that is so important to cybersecurity.
Thank you. I think you addressed that first item on the study.
Right.
We talked about finding competent workers, the inability to find enough of them. We're going to go to the audience at this point. If you have a question, please just raise your hand and I'll come to you. Are there any questions from the audience? Go ahead, Doug.
I want to ask a question. What role does the communication skills play in this field?
I would say if you list the top 3 things I need, is communication. I need teams that can sit and take ideas. I got plenty of people come and admire the problem, but I ask them, write me a paper, or more importantly, write me a one-pager, and it'll take them 3 weeks. Yeah, because it's, well, if I only have one page to write, what do you put down? And I think it was Cicero that said, sorry for the long letter, I didn't have enough time to write it shorter, and there was something along that line, on paraphrasing. And that's absolutely true. I mean, it's what's that critical piece of knowledge that needs to be down so the next person can take it and do the next leg of work, and that's integrated with the other priorities and policies and the other things that they have going on. So I certainly do not think that Secretary Perry reads every piece of paper I write. I certainly know he doesn't. Nor should he. He's got plenty of other things to be worried about in the Department of Energy. My job is to take cybersecurity and take that worry, or at least lessen that worry. And so I need my team to be able to write, like, this is what it means to you when you see this. You know, our number went from 50 to 65. Okay, in context, what does that really mean? And what should when should we start worrying, type thing. So communication and being able to get up and talk to people is very important. There's times where I'm not going to be able to address we have a cyber council made up of undersecretaries, very senior level people, and I need to have my team have the confidence that they can give a presentation and hit those key points that are imperative in that 15 minutes of speaking, that they're going to take away what I want them to take away.
I'm just going to relate something that I remember from my undergraduate degree, which, as I said, if you were listening, I graduated 32 years ago from Columbia, and I have a degree in computer science, so I'm a programmer by training. The best thing I ever learned was, what is a perfect sentence? And I asked people, I asked my kids, I asked friends' kids, do you know what a perfect sentence is? Nobody has a clue. It's a sentence where you cannot remove a word without changing the meaning of the sentence. It's a very important concept in writing code, that you want less, but more important in communicating with people. If you can take a word out without changing the meaning of the sentence was too long. Very important concept, I think.
No, I agree with you. I'm going to piggyback on that for just one more point on that. We're writing policy, and I talk to folks and I say, it's just just simple English exercises. I wasn't a big English guy growing up, but hey, what's that first paragraph? Does it tell you what the rest of the paper is about, right? And I tell them that each paragraph has another idea that supports that initial idea, and that first sentence matters, right? Because I found, because I worked with some people that didn't have a lot of time but read a lot, that they pretty much read that first sentence, and if they agree with it enough, they won't read the rest of that paragraph, right? They jump down to the next one, and that's how they get through it very quick. So technical folks write opposite, right? We write, and we talk about we did this, and we tried this, and this is what we discovered. And at the very end, here's the aha moment, right? That's how we write. And so changing my writing style was critical. I wouldn't be here if I didn't. And teaching my team to be able to write that way too is like, look, I just one sentence. What's important? One sentence, and then give me the information that supports that one sentence. And you'd be surprised. I mean, if you take the time and talk to the technical folks and explain why that matters, then you'll start seeing them pick up the speed and write a lot better from, at least from my perspective, where I have to deal with a lot of executives.
Hi.
Let me add this real quick. Communication is key, because a lot of times communication must go up and communication must come down. A lot of times the operators that are and the analysts that are hands on keyboards that are operating our technology, they see things that we don't see in a management position on a daily basis. We must give them latitude to report that back to us, and we must be able to react to them, what they're telling us. A lot of times if you shut off those people from reporting back to you, you're missing key things that are putting the organization at risk.
Well, thank you very much for your input and giving us, your experiences as a CISO and as a consultant. So my question is, I've been in the information security industry. I've been doing it for 18 years, and I'm more on the compliance, auditing, assessments, policy, all that good stuff. Now, as a subject matter expert, it literally takes me about 8 months to a year to prove that I have the knowledge, the skills, the work that I'm delivering is, what's going to be good for our company, et cetera, et cetera. So as a CISO, My question is, when you started your respective roles, did you feel that you kind of have to prove yourself in order to now gain the respect of the person that you direct to, whether it's the the CIO, the CEO, et cetera, et cetera?
For me, I think it's interesting. I think at the federal level, when you get to CISO or deputy CISO, you're pretty much already did your brand. And I know a lot of CISOs. We were just talking about we were talking with Emory, and I've worked with Emory before. And Emory and I are probably opposites in a lot of ways, but we're both very, very passionate about cybersecurity, and we play, those strengths on and off. But our brands were already defined before we were deputy CISOs, because we were out there and we were writing papers, and we were volunteering to do things inside the federal space, working on working groups, and bringing ideas, not just sitting there waiting for somebody to go, what should we do? And then someone says what it is, and then I kind of just saddle up in there. A lot of cases I stepped up, and I don't know if you remember the high valued asset, the OMB Sprint, after the OPM incident. If you're in the federal government, they had 6 sprints, and they wanted to do something immediate. And of course, OMB doesn't have a lot of people, especially technical background, so they're going to canvass, they're going to scrape people from the federal agencies, and you have to now work for OMB for a short period of time, sometimes doing your other job at the same time. And of course, no one wants to do that, right? That's just more work. You're not going to get paid anymore. You don't get paid overtime in the government. So now you're in this high risk, high tempo, high profile exercise. And I remember my boss, he says to me, he says, Paul, I know this is probably a ready, fire, aim exercise, something along that lines. He's no longer there, by the way, so I could probably talk a little bit out of school. But what I want you to do is I really want, the Department of Energy really needs to back the administration and OMB on this, and I want you to do whatever you can to help out, right? So the Uber ride over, I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to have to do something really crazy. And I said to myself, the first thing that they ask for a volunteer for, I'm not only going to volunteer for it, but I'm going to lead it. I didn't even know what it was going to be, right? I said, that's what my boss wants me to do, so I want to be able to say the Department of Energy was the first one to step up and back OMB's play. Because it was important to my boss, right? And if it interests my boss, it fascinates me, so there it is. And so that's exactly what I did, and it was the high-valued assets. And I don't know if people talk about the high-valued assets, you can blame me or thank me, I don't know. But what I did was I said, hey, what are we going to do? We got to now assess all of our assets and figure out which ones are the most criticals, what's the jewels, the crown jewels. And the only way we can do it, because there's not like a one big ruler, I said, well, let's go back and let's do operational risk management like we did in the Navy, right? Back to what I did before. And what are those key flags that might indicate that this thing might be really something we need to take? Like, is it a unique database? Does it have IP, forward-facing IPs? Is it sensitive data? Is it PII? Is it health? Is it financial? Which, by the way, when I worked for CMS for a bit, I realized that not all PII is the same, right? Because people don't want their personal information out, but whatever you do, don't let their health information out. But if you're going to let that out, don't let their financial information out. I always thought it was the other way around, but apparently the financial stuff is more important to most people than their health, which I thought was odd. But anyway, that was kind of the idea of how to kind of break out some critical characteristics, and then how to kind of quickly scale them and decide whether we ought to look at this a little bit closer as high valued and add a little more security to it.
Dr. Nobles, has that been your experience
The question,
in regards to proving yourself?
the follow-up is to Dr. Nobles. Has he had the same experience
Yeah,
as
he
Paul in terms of?
So again, remember earlier I said I consider myself to be a cybersecurity researcher. So I'm always doing research on my own, and I'm always presenting this research. And I like to do what we call applied research. That's research that we can use in the field right away. And so I go to a lot of conferences. As a matter of fact, I'll be speaking Friday up in Minneapolis, and I'll be speaking next week down in Atlanta with research of my own. And so that's how you build your platform and your brand, as a researcher. Again, that's how my education comes into play, and that is how eventually I ended up with a fellowship at a think tank down in Washington, D.C. So it's important.
Thank you.
Is there another question in the audience? While you're thinking about your question, I have another question. There are always these discussions about what cybersecurity is or is not. Is it about technology? Is it management and policy? Is it about processes? Where do you spend your time as a cybersecurity expert, as a CISO? Where's your focus?
I like to steal a page from Manzoor's book. We talk about this when we have lunch sometimes, that we both believe that cybersecurity is a business strategy. I teach at the MBA program at UMUC, and I tell you right now, we talk about cybersecurity in my MBA program. And the reason I say that is because there's nothing like a business leader that's coming up that doesn't understand cybersecurity risk. The earlier I can expose them to understanding that cybersecurity is a business strategy, they need to understand the risk, they need to understand the technology that these organizations are bringing on. Because at the end of the day, it's really about people, technology, and processes. And as a business leader, you need to learn how to drive those things and manage the risk, as well as be able to understand the cybersecurity threat. So to me, cybersecurity threat and risk is just another of the 11 types of threat, depending on which type of organization, 11 types of risk, depending on the organization. But it's about managing people, processes, and technology. More so people. I like to put my focus on the people because technology and processes are developed by the people, for the people.
Thank you. Paul?
Yeah, I think most of that I spent is about risk management. I mean, it comes down to everybody is a risk practitioner. You decide what roads to take. You're going to run that yellow light. You're going to run a little bit faster. You've decided that you made these decisions, whether you think about them or not. And for those that say, well, I don't make a decision until I have all the facts, well, you just closed down a lot of options. What you really did is wait till there was only one option left, right? And then you took that one, which is not, I call that risk avoidance. But so that's the other thing, is how do I kind of communicate with risk? Because we all think we're great risk practitioners, but we all know that's not true. We all can't be the best one. I'm up here. No, I'm just joking. We all can't be best. So we're all good at different ways of looking at risk. And now, how do we kind of get that common view? And when I do that, sometimes I use stories about flying because I don't want to talk about cybersecurity because people are kind of really entrenched in their position about, this tool over that tool. And I like to just kind of break it down into little pieces and parts and do a little bit of storytelling about, hey, what are we trying to do here? And it's not uncommon for me to, after being in a meeting and everybody's kind of arguing a little ways, and I kind of say, look, I'm not trying to solve world hunger. I'm just trying to plant a field of corn. I'm just trying to get through today. And what's the most important thing that we have to do today to kind of move the ball forward? And so, again, it goes back to communications, about trying to get people all looking at the same thing, or at least understand what the same vision is so we can get there.
Thank you very much. Did you want to add to that, Dr. Nobles?
Oh, no, I'm good.
Hi, my question is about keeping current. As we all know, cybersecurity is a large and complex field, getting larger, getting complex. How do you keep current? What are your sources of information? How do you prioritize what you want to focus your energy on in terms of learning new technologies and techniques and policies? And how do you know when to cede that responsibility to somebody who works for you? In other words, having people who work for you who know more than you about a particular topic. Yes, I'm Alan Carswell. I'm formerly of the University of Maryland University College. I'm now at Stevenson University, where I'm department chair in information systems out of the business school.
Thank you, Dr. Carswell.
For me, before we go and do these talks, we kind of get together. We talk a little bit about strategies, what the question's going to be. Because I know it all looks very impromptu, but we've practiced. No, we at least talk. And one of the things I talked about in our discussions was about when I worked in a sub-agency, I worked very closely with the technical. And I could look at it from technical operational executive, and then you can do people process technology if you kind of want to do a chart, and that's really kind of interesting to see where vendors hang out. They're very technical in technology and very little in people and process, where we really need that gap filled. But I digress. But the idea is that from a technical perspective, if you have just raw data, you can't do actionable intelligence on that. You have to make it into information, then to analysis, and then have an actionable plan on it. And that's why I look at cybersecurity. We have technology, but you got to make it operational, and then the operational so what for the executive, right? So that's kind of my stack that I work through. When I worked for sub-agencies, when I worked at ICE, I'd say probably good 40 to 60% of my time was in the technical, with probably 30 to 40% in the operational, maybe only a little bit 5 to 10 worried about writing, and because I knew somebody else is in the stack, right? It's going to be looked at by 15, 20 people before it gets to the secretary, and it gets all rolled up, right? I'm just one small wheel in the big cog of the machine. And the higher you go, though, it gets flipped over. I spend probably only about 10, 15 talking about technology. I tell people I don't buy technology. I look for capabilities that are going to move the needle. It's going to be very impactful, and that's what I focus on. So I don't, it cracks me up. About this time, everybody started naming their solutions ohms, like broniohm and tanium, and I was like, I almost need a nuclear physicist to come in and put these pieces together because they sound so chemically oriented. But really, it's about, if I'm spending more time in the operational, and really most time about the executives, the strategic thinking. OMB puts out a new requirement, or Congress or the president puts out a new executive order. How are we at the department going to support that? Well, still doing what we're doing, and we really don't like these little pieces, but we can't necessarily go on record. So how do we show that we're supportive, and how do we move the needle again? Where do we need to be in the future to be responsive? So to your question, I gave up the technical stuff a long time ago because they get paid. There's people that get paid to do that. I used to be in that fight. My job is to kind of keep the trains on time, to be the conductor, make sure the schedules are on time, not be the engineer on the train. And if you try to be all of that, you're not gonna get any sleep. You won't be very successful. I will say though, it's good to have an understanding of what the engineer does, or what everybody does in the piece. So you're not gonna be thrown in right off the bat and be the CISO, and you don't have any experience in policy and don't have any experience in the technical solutions. It might be a little bit of, hey, I was over here and I worked very technical, looking at the bad guys from a very adversarial perspective, and I groomed my way to be CISO. And then there might be somebody who's a policy person, and you're like, when you're younger, you're like, well, they're not on the pointy end of the spear. They're in the back. They're like the supply folks. We don't care about them, but they're very critical, right? And they help us move the marker back to the center. So along the way, as you're kind of going up the pipe of cybersecurity, every time you get a chance to do something, especially something you haven't done before, or maybe in that, right outside your comfort zone, take that opportunity, or at least piggyback with somebody to learn a little bit more, so you can understand it when you get to that point.
Thank you. We have about 3 minutes left before I ask my last question. I think we have a question in the back.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Hollis. I'm also a professor at UMUC teaching cybersecurity. This is for Dr. Nobles. You mentioned earlier human factors in cybersecurity. My question is, if you were to juxtapose both the military and the civilian side as far as addressing human factors in cybersecurity, do you see a disparity in the two?
Absolutely. The last research that I showed where the military actually tracked what we paid for in human factors, found a piece of research that dates back to 1996 where we invested $200 million in human factors in the military. And if you got it, and the next question I asked was why? Because that's when we was, coming off the Cold War, we transitioning to a lot of advanced technology. That's why we was invested so much money in human factors. But today, organizations, we buy technology and we bolt technology on top of technology, and then we end up having to loosen our security controls to get that piece of technology to work. The reason why is because we're not doing our homework. We have to do our homework, because at the end of the day, it's really about the operators and the end users that's going to be interfacing with that capability. We just don't do our homework. The military is very great at human factors. We invested a lot of time and a lot of people, and we leverage it from medicine, nuclear power, industrial safety, and aviation. They learned the hard way. But in cybersecurity, we haven't embraced human factors, and we're learning the hard way. Again, we could cut this thing in time in half if we just do lessons learned from other organizations and other industries when it comes to human factors. You know, it's more than just security awareness training. Because of the one thing that I asked security awareness vendors, so you selling a company security awareness training, what is your scientific foundation on why you selling them that specific training? They can't give it to you because you can't take, you know, one set of training and apply it to every organization. It doesn't work. Every organization should have proprietary training based on their data, what their daily data is telling them in terms of their failures, their limitations and weaknesses, rather than applying like a mayonnaise on the sandwich. It doesn't work that way.
Thank you. We are toward the end of the session, but I have one closing question for you all. But before I ask that question, I would just like to remind the audience that we have another session right after this one. So please stay with us for the last session of the day. It'll take a few minutes to mic up our next panel, but we're going to have a great panel, so please stay with us. So my last question is, what keeps you up at night?
I think for me, that what kind of keeps me up at night is, you know, what's my next strategy? I worry not about what happened yesterday and what we're going to do to fix that, because that's to me like driving down the road looking through the rearview mirror. I got to look down range and say, hey, what's coming up, and how do I kind of get the distractions? And believe me, as vendors will love to throw more buzzwords at you than you can shake a stick at, to make sure my boss is looking at the right thing. So not only do I got to start figuring out what's in the art of the possible, but then where can I position the team to be ready when the time comes. And so, you know, I know a lot of people are worried about, hey, we got the advanced persistent threats and we got the insider threats, and I'm like, you know, yeah, those are always going to be there. Those are a constant, and we're going to work on those. But it's that change, it's that fundamental change, that new executive order, that new requirement, that big unknown breach that's coming up, and all of a sudden you realize that you're part of that breach, or you're just as susceptible to that breach. You know, I worry, what gets me to bed at night would probably be the better part of the story would be is how do I make sure we're investing in things that show that due diligence I talked about earlier, that when someone comes up and says, you know, hey, this occurred, I can say, yeah, well, I can show that my organization did the best they could. They used the taxpayer dollars wisely, they invested correctly, and we forecasted downrange to be in the best position possible when the time comes.
Thank you, Paul. Dr. Nobles?
There's several things that keep me up at night, but I'm mostly anyway, like most cybersecurity professionals, we're like night owls. But the one thing that really keeps me up are insiders inside of your systems that are looking to do malicious activity. These are people that have elevated privileges and accesses that, you know, they have access to critical information. That's one thing that keeps me up at night. Those personnel with elevated privileges who don't protect those elevated privileges. And so somebody else can gain access to your network. And the third one thing that keeps me up at night, the things that we don't know about. What's the next threat? What I don't know. Because I'm always looking for what I don't know based on what's going on in the cybersecurity landscape.
Wow, thank you very much. Let's give our panel a hand.
University of Maryland University College is now University of Maryland Global Campus.